Chapter 5, A Slow Passage of Time. A week had passed, nothing. And this particular day, Judge Shake just couldn't seem to doze off for his usual nap in the afternoon. His head was swirling with thoughts and questions. Mostly questions. Suddenly it hit him. The books, he thought. After all, since the first day he sat in a classroom in law school back in 1905, he had heard nothing from his teachers and elders other than check the law books, look for a precedent, do research, check the books, and then do it again. Soon he was on the phone calling 411. Is there a law library in Chicago? He asked the information operator. Good God, what am I saying? Certainly, Chicago has a library. I'm in a big city now. I have a place called Morrison Law. Shake wrote down the number and called the institution. It answered quickly. Hi, my name is Curtis G. Shake. I just moved to Chicago, and I'd like to know what credentials I have to access the files at your law library. Do you know anything about the law? Are you a teacher? Why are you calling? Judge Shake smiled to himself. Then, thinking quickly, he decided to do something he seldom did, toot his own horn. He took a deep breath and said, I'm a former Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court. We'll have you talk to Mr. DiCenzo. He's the chief librarian. Hold on. Shake waited through a series of buzzes and clicks. He'd been pleased with how quickly the law library had answered. Now he thought they must have the oldest switchboard in the city. Then there was a voice on the other end of the line. It sounded frail and old. There was a good reason for that. Ronald DiCenzo was frail and old. He was way past retirement age, but the library system didn't seem to mind. Shake remembered that a stupid and arbitrary age rule had forced his dear friend Amanda Grubb out of her job after years of teaching and counseling back in Vincennes. DiCenzo was not as unfortunate. He had done good work for 50 years. The Morrison Law Library was where he was born to work. Yes, this is Ronald DiCenzo. To whom am I speaking? This is Curtis G. Shake. I just moved to Chicago and I need to do some research at your library. Say that name again, DiCenzo asked. Shake. Curtis Grover Shake. I hate to bother you, but I'm a former Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court. The judge waited for a reply from DiCenzo. There was nothing but silence. No clicks, no buzzes. Okay, he thought. I'll give it to him both barrels. For some reason, I dread this. Judge Shake cleared his throat and then said, I am a former chief prosecutor from the Nuremberg war crimes trials. Only an instant passed before DiCenzo spoke. How soon can you get here, Judge? I'd be honored to meet you. I'll throw open the whole library to you. DiCenzo then gave Shake the address of the Morrison Law Library, his personal phone number, and after Shake told him in which neighborhood he lived, DiCenzo even suggested the best bus route. Shake realized he had found a kindred spirit, someone who sounded as elderly as he was, and most importantly, someone who loved the law. Judge Shake kicked himself for not hitting the book sooner in the Snyder case. During his career, he must have spent 1 million hours in law libraries, or at least had one of his clerks researching things. Even if he didn't find out anything, it would be fun to look at past cases. After all, he thought out loud, where better than in the city of Chicago to look at previous crimes and murders and mayhem? This is going to be fun. I better head for the bus. The transit information he was given worked perfectly. Shake quickly realized that either Mr. DeCenzo had spent a lot of time on the bus or loved that kind of trivia and liked to share it. Maybe he had a bus booklet in his desk and was simply a page ahead of the information he was supposedly pulling off the top of his head. Shake grabbed a bottle of Canada Dry from the fridge, made sure the cap was screwed on, and headed for the bus stop. The day was particularly cold. The winds were coming in off the lake. Judge Shake's apartment was only about 15 blocks from the shoreline, but he wasn't prepared for that kind of cold. Someone had thrown a big weather switch in the Chicago area. It had been getting colder and colder with each passing week, but this was a sudden change in the thermostat. He thought he would freeze while waiting for the Armitage Avenue bus. He was even too cold to drink his Canada Dry. Luckily, his change of buses at Clark Street would be quick, and there was a bus shelter there. As he waited for the second bus, he did a mental inventory of his resources. He still must have about $200 worth of quarters in that big jar of change the moving company finally delivered. It sat in a prominent place in his kitchen. He was loaded for bear when it came to riding the bus in future weeks. The Morrison Law Library was in an aging 5-story building on a side street. DeCenzo had cautioned Shake that he might need to take a taxi from where he got off the Clark Street bus to find the front door of the Morrison building. He did. The short trip's fare was very much more than he expected. He thought the price was criminal. Well, that's Chicago, he thought. I guess I look like a tourist to the driver. I should call the cab commission on this one. Judge Shake found the huge weathered mahogany doors of the library extremely hard for an old man with a cane. Finally, a young woman who appeared to be in her early 20s helped him. "I hate these doors," she told Shake. "I always dread being sent over here to the Morrison just because of these lousy goddamn doors." Shake didn't like the fact that a young woman used that kind of language, but he realized that it could have been worse, much worse. And after all, she did help him. Inside, he found there was no receptionist. The woman who answered the telephone must be in an inner office, he mumbled. There was not even a visible head librarian anywhere, just doors that led to aisles and aisles of stacks and stacks. The smell of old books was nearly intoxicating to Shake. He had smelled that musty fragrance before, many, many times. Thanking God the Morrison Law Library had an elevator, Shake made it to DeCenzo's office on the 5th floor. He knocked, then entered very slowly. Unlike the front door, DeCenzo's door was almost too easy to open. "You must be the judge," he greeted Shake. "Well, while you were on your way down here, and it looks as if I did give you the right directions, I checked on you. Quite a life you've led, sir." "I simply called in one of my librarians, gave him your name, and presto! Look at this stack of stuff I found. It's an honor to have you here, sir. Sit. Tell me why you chose this place." Shake was amused at DeCenzo's frenetic way of speaking. It was nothing like the timid-sounding man he'd heard on the phone. He was pleased with DeCenzo's demeanor and his glowing compliments. He nearly laughed when he realized that if ever they made a movie about DeCenzo, he would be played by the actor who played Floyd the Barber on the Andy Griffith Show. Shake was somewhat self-impressed by the tribute he was given. He realized the good things about his career were well-earned ammunition he could use to open a lot of doors, even though trotting out his past was not his style. Well, usually not his style. Well, Shake answered, I've only been in Chicago a short time, but I've already gotten very interested in an ongoing murder case here. Murder? Well, we seem to have a lot of those, DeCenzo remarked. Well, sir, this one is different. It was brutal, involving an elderly Jewish couple in the suburbs. Something snapped in me when I heard the news coverage. I haven't been able to get it out of my mind ever since. I can't think of their names. Schneider, that's it, Schneider. DeCenzo replied, Yes, Snyder, I saw the news reports too. Very brutal, insane, more than cruel. Usually here in Chicago, someone's dead because of an argument or family dispute or drugs or even being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But in this case, if I remember, it was blind, vicious, unbridled hate. I can see why you, having run one of the trials at Nuremberg, have a reason to be interested, but why come here? We have nothing to do with the case yet. This place, as you know, is full of the past, full of precedents, full of court cases and decisions that are gathering dust until they're needed again. Shake replied, Well, Mr. DeCenzo, I'm really not sure why I am here. Maybe I just needed to smell a law library again. I was getting lonely and scared and bored, and good Lord, I'm not sure what else has been running through my mind. My new apartment was closing in on me. I was beginning to miss my old house. Something drew me to this place. It was the first one the phone operator gave me when I called information. Well, I'm glad you're here, DeCenzo said. I'm sorry you're lonely and scared. Chicago is an intimidating city. That's the way I found it when I moved here from rural Wisconsin to go to school and seek my fortune when I was a lad. I was all too new and too very, very intimidated by the bigness of Chicago. You have a right to feel lonely, but never to feel bored. I'll tell you what. I'll get you a brand new lifetime library pass. You won't be bored anymore. With your background, you'll likely be lost in the old records. You'll forget to go home at night. Meanwhile, hey, would you like to do lunch? It's my treat. Anyone serve Canada Dry? Shake asked. Well, I think I can find the right place. This is a great part of Chicago. There are a lot of students around here, and that means a lot of restaurants, and most of them, thank God, are fairly priced. DeCenzo took Shake across the street to a small sit-down place called Pat's. He talked the judge's head off during the walk over there. Shake found the menu very limited, printed on only one side of a yellow sheet of stiff paper, but Pat's did have Canada Dry. What do you suggest, Mr. DeCenzo? Call me Ron. Okay, Ron, what's best here? Well, they do have some really good burgers and corned beef and cabbage and egg rolls and Mexican hot dishes. All of that on that tiny menu? Shake inquired with a big amount of incredulity in his voice and skepticism in his eyes. No, you see, you have to ask for some of those. I've eaten here for decades. The place has changed hands 7 times. So now I know the ins and outs pretty well. It's my second home. Judge Shake asked for corned beef and cabbage and greasy French fries. DeCenzo had some kind of Mexican dish that Shake had never heard of. When it arrived, the smell of the food was overwhelming. I think I'll have that the next time, he told DeCenzo. During the next few years, there would not be a week that Judge would not take the Armitage and Clark Street buses and a taxi to the Morrison Library. But before his next trip, he called the cab commission and found out the fare should really be a lot less. They're not going to cheat me again, he thought. Some days when he visited the library, the judge just picked a year or a case at random, then went back to the files, and he even found transcripts from the Capone era and earlier. He was amazed to find that even up to recent times, remnants of that era were still having an impact on the Chicago legal system. Of course, he read through the records of Leopold and Loeb. It shocked the nation. Every newspaper and radio station described the entire trial. In the Leopold and Loeb case, two overly wealthy Chicago boys were charged with trying to pull off the perfect crime. One of the accused, Richard Loeb, was only 17. He'd just begun school to be a lawyer. The court transcripts described him as a smooth charmer. He had convinced a childhood buddy, Nathan Leopold, to go along with the idea of committing a perfect crime, a crime that could not be traced. He thought it would be an easy way to study the law, at least that's what he told Leopold. Leopold was so enamored of Loeb that he developed a kind of misguided loyalty to his friend. It was one of those, I'll walk off a cliff for you if necessary, kind of relationship. Both the boys came from filthy rich families. Loeb was the son of the vice president of Sears Roebuck. Leopold was a child prodigy. He spoke his first words at 4 months and was fluent in half a dozen languages and could read a dozen others. With far too much time on their hands and tired of projects that their immense wealth could buy, just on a lark and to test their skills, they plotted to lure a young neighbor boy into a car, murder him, and hide the 14-year-old's body. They had meticulously plotted the crime. Their goal was to provide a clean method of operation, leaving no traces. Shake was very much interested in the main clue that was found, a pair of crushed glasses near the boy's body. The one-of-a-kind glasses were traced to a Chicago optometrist. He testified that he had made the very expensive pair for the wealthy Nathan Leopold on a special order. Judge Shake then realized that it was safe to say that had Leopold not lost his glasses, he and his friend might have gotten away with murder. There were no other clues, at least not in the court records. The wealthy boys were defended by Chicago-based dynamic lawyer Clarence Darrow. Just a year later, Darrow would make national news again, this time in rural Tennessee, defending John Scopes in the Monkey trial. Even though that was an out-of-state trial, copies of many of the records were in the Morrison Library. Additionally, Chicago's big 50,000-watt station, WGN, had covered it, using a primitive phone company hookup. At the Morrison, Shake found that there were reports on the gangster era, and very alarmingly, too many of the files of anti-Semitic violence that seemed to grow exponentially in the 2 decades before Shake arrived. Judge Shake felt at home at the Morrison. He was like a kid in a candy shop. The library would be his home away from home in the days when he felt the most lonely and really needed to immerse himself in the law again. He was glad he had a pass. He would call upon Director DeCenzo when he simply needed a shoulder to cry on. Ron DeCenzo was not only a good listener, but was fast becoming a part of the judge's inner circle of friends in his adopted new city. Maybe his departure from Vincennes to get away from the past and the future had not been a mistake. Now Dolores and Brad and Ron would help him in his quest to find the truth about the Snyder killing. Join me again for the next part of Return to Nuremberg.